Good evening and welcome to Around the Lake, a community news production by the staff of the Ithaca Times and the Finger Lakes community newspapers. With me tonight is Josh Brokaw. He's the reporter for the Ithaca Times. I'm Glynis Hart. I'm the editor of the Finger Lakes community newspapers, and in the booth behind the camera is Bill Chasen, editor of the Ithaca Times. Top story this week was the state budget and how it all shook out. Mad fun in the local schools. So what happened this week, Josh?
Well, that'd be a question probably better directed to many of the state reporters in Albany bureaus who I was following a lot this week, trying to keep up with how the budget was shaking down so far as it regards education, because I was writing a feature story about what local educators thought about Cuomo's state budget and how it was going to affect them. That was coming out on the day they were supposed to be voting
things
on the budget.
Things were coming through the email.
Yeah,
as we were working out the papers on Monday, and I was getting stuff in Facebook and
I was getting updates to Google Docs. People have shared with me, people who have been trying to kind of agitate for people to call their legislators and everything. So. Yeah, it's kind of a messy process, it sounds like. It doesn't really sound like much fun.
My sense of it was that Cuomo backed down a little bit.
The sort of the analyses that I was reading, a lot of people who've been covering the State House for a while, at least throughout his first 5 years, is that he is so staked on the on-time budget that he will let things go. Even though he does have sort of a bully pulpit as governor, he kind of has a lot of power to get a budget passed.
Well, they have to accept his executive budget. Essentially, or he can shut the state government down.
No one wants to do that.
And nobody wants to do that. But I did have a sense in the weeks leading up to this that with the uproar from the teachers' unions and the general uproar over using tests as the rubric by which teachers will be evaluated, that there might have been enough of a pushback that the legislators maybe would go to a shutdown rather than accept the cuts in school aid that Governor Cuomo was proposing.
Well, I think my understanding of what happened is the schooling numbers still aren't hammered out as of Wednesday, even though there was a vote. The evaluation thing, which is the biggest, I think,
went
of the
to
teachers,
the state education
is
department.
Now in the
they're
education
going to work
department,
on it,
and
right.
Supposedly they're going to hammer out some rules by June. So to me, not knowing much about Albany politics, that sounds like a win for the governor because it's in the executive branch. But I don't know how these things work.
Well, initially we were going into the school budget season. We had a couple things on the table. One was that the governor's runs, which are the estimates of school aid that the schools need to put their budgets together, their budgets which go to the voters on May 19th, that the governor was withholding those numbers, which are usually released in January. So that was dicey. So it was
yesterday, March 31st.
Right, yesterday, March 31st, they finally got to know how much they're getting. It was a little bit more than promised. It was $1.1 billion initially, and now it's 1.6,
1.4 to 1.6, yeah.
Right.
And that's what I try to focus on in this story, is kind of how that uncertainty plays out as schools try to budget things. And also how the gap elimination adjustment, which apparently is still going to exist in some form, and how the wonky foundation aid formulas really affect how hard it is to budget for a school district, whether it's the city school district, which gets something like 22 to 23% of its money from the state, or a rural district like South Seneca, which is getting
60.
Well over half.
Yeah.
So that's really what I try to focus on in this story. And it was also, how it plays out. No one really knows. It seems like the only thing that's really hammered out is that they compromised. It was Cuomo wanted an expansion of teacher tenure to 5 years, as far as 5 years in a row of competency. I'm trying effective is
Effectiveness,
the effective
yeah,
is
they
the
have to be deemed
evaluation.
effective.
And it has been 3, and so it's extended to 4. Now, how those evaluations are going to be eventually conducted
How they'll
is
be
still a
conducted
question.
is a question. Yeah, and I think that was worth fighting over because the evaluations, what he was saying was that they would be 50% based on the standardized tests, which could cause problems for teachers who, for instance, took a lot of special ed students into their classes, or even I did hear a case where one teacher, she was already at the top. So it was very difficult, right? It was really difficult for her to measure how much better her student, I mean, once you get to 100%, if all your kids are at 100 and they stay there, then you could be a failing teacher because your kids aren't improving.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought much about the baseline issue. Yeah, the other funny thing with the evaluations as it plays out is, all these proposals that have been floated. It was percentages of how much is evaluations. There's also this thing that teacher and public education advocates have been saying is that there's an unfunded mandate because now supposedly part of your evaluations are supposed to come from like outside the district or basically an unrelated administrator.
Right, that means somebody's got to be paid.
So whether it's a professor
to do the evaluations,
a SUNY or retired so-and-so. But now they're talking about, instead of percentages, a matricy model, which I haven't found a reporter yet or anyone who's found anyone who
knows what that means.
Like, it's been looked at in other states. I think it means more bingo card of evaluation rather than percentages, which in practice, how much that makes a difference, who knows?
Who knows?
So, but so this is an ongoing story, but tried to lay out where it's at, where it will be. The GEA isn't going anywhere. Might get smaller this year because there's more money, but it's not going anywhere.
Well, it's supposed to gradually decrease.
Well,
but they took the windfall that the state won from a couple of court settlements.
Like 5.6 billion. Or
yeah, it was a couple billion, and they decided to spend it on infrastructure instead, and a couple good things for upstate broadband expansion.
Well, I think part of that money was that pot of competitive, like 1.5 billion, and all the different regions had like 7 regions compete for 3 chunks of it or something, some sort of prize money aspect.
Right.
Kind of feels like, upstate Hunger Games sort of thing.
Right. If you don't have a good grant writer, you're toast.
Like grant writer Hunger Games, that would be postmodern at least. Well, so anyway.
In other developments.
I hear Newfield is seceding.
Yeah, this was a big one. It came as a surprise, but not that much of a surprise. Newfield voted to secede from Tompkins County. They really had enough. According to Town Supervisor Jeff Hart, a rumor that there was going to be countywide zoning, known in Newfield as the Z word, was the last straw. In their initial move, they went for Texas. They felt an affinity there. A lot of pro-gun, do-it-yourselfers. Texas said no. Texas had a problem with the, actually, they didn't want the waste transfer station is how I heard it. So they're going with Tioga County, and this ought to work out. I think that
there's some affinities there.
There's some affinities there. I thought that the Tompkins County Legislature could have fought a little harder to keep Newfield.
Is there just not enough of a tax base for them to care?
Well, I mean, we do need Casella's waste service. I mean, if that goes, I mean, where do we send the garbage?
You can always put it in the lake.
Oh, that's nasty.
I don't think they have plans against that, do they?
I'm sure
so
there's a
why,
rule.
why is countywide zoning such a big deal?
Why is zoning known as the Z word?
Yeah, why is Newfield not want countywide zoning?
Oh, actually, a lot of our rural towns do not want anything to do with zoning. It's been a huge fight in Ovid, which we covered with the Ovid Gazette. I mean, zoning is it infringes on your property rights, and that's what upsets people. They don't want to be told what to do with their property. And interesting, in looking up land use ordinances, which has been a big battle in Ovid to pass a land use ordinance this year, one of the things in the initial, in the state manual for how to do a land use ordinance, it mentions that zoning, it gets people's back up because they don't want to be told what to do with their property. And that is how zoning is perceived. The other side of the coin, of course, or the other perspective, is that zoning is a way that people can actually control development in their town.
Rather than just
right.
House.
One could argue that if Newfield had zoning, the battle to not let alternative waste services expand their transfer station to include recyclables would never have happened. It would have just been zoned that you couldn't do that. But they don't have zoning, and so when the Mentees wanted to expand their waste hauling business and include, just basically put in another pole barn to do recyclables, people in Newfield, especially the neighbors, got pretty upset.
Yeah, pole barns will do that to people. They are pretty important structures. But, okay, so, well, I had a few details. I think people might have heard by now the hot truck might be moving. Which I haven't yet had the pleasure of visiting, so I guess I didn't quite understand at first how important this was to certain segments of the local
hot
community.
truck is an icon.
So,
the hot truck has been here forever.
But I guess moving for the hot truck is
Cornell
weird.
was 1/3 the size it is now when the hot truck was first parked
in
there.
2004 then?
Yeah, something like that. Only half as many buildings. The dorms of Mordor were not yet built. So what's going on with the hot truck?
Well, the short of it is that the location is not as hot as it was in former days because of, as you said, they've changed the dorm
of Mordor.
So basically your traffic flow, your foot traffic, especially at 2 a.m., people do have a sort of determinist way they go about walking places, like back to their dorms from the bars. And so
from
the
chapter house you
Avenue,
you kind of you bypass it.
You're
go
going
up University
straight up the hill instead of I guess back around. I guess those dorms were more of a big deal along Stewart there, or buildings there, or it was more, I don't know. So you're going, right now it's north of like the chapter house on Stewart.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so they want to move it up to, straight up the hill from the chapter house. I've been to the chapter house, by the way. I know where that is. Dryden.
This is good.
Up at Dryden.
Finding your way around.
Up at the corner of Dryden and College. There's more action up there going on. So.
Wow, the corner of Dryden and College.
I believe that's, yeah.
I don't know if there's room for it up there. That might get a few people upset. But they would definitely get more business.
Yeah. Yes, the corner of Eddy and Dryden, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Which is still pretty much straight up the hill near the gates there. So the idea is they actually, when they put in the city put in new food truck rules, because there weren't any. They were just kind of the staples that existed. When they put in new food truck rules last January 2014, they also instituted a couple of food truck parking spots at that spot. So the hot truck wants one of those, basically.
Okay.
And they said they'd pay more. They would pay for all day if they had it. The owner, Al Smith, also Shortstop Deli, says that basically a new hot truck will be needed, and they need to make more money. And they think if they're up there, they'll do better.
Make more money. I wonder about how the other restaurant owners on Eddy Street feel about that.
Well, I mean, I think that's restaurant owners in brick and mortar generally aren't all that happy. But I think the idea would be that they would then, again, not move once they towed it up the hill, at least until they got a new truck. Because the old truck doesn't have any isn't self-contained like a moving food truck is. Because Cornell back in the day asked them, please turn off your compressors, we'll give you an outlet.
Ah.
So.
That's why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have those cords running along. That's
yeah.
I didn't know
that.
that.
That's why they have a box and everything. And if you want to find out how the hot truck got its name, you can read this week's At the Good Times. And I have that because I went to the meeting and didn't just mind the documents for the story. So, anyway.
So this is good. Have you eaten at the hot truck?
I haven't yet. I haven't really been, well, it's only recently become nice enough to really stomp up the hill.
Yeah, that
might
be taking a bite out of their business, too.
Yeah, first month or so, starting in February. It's not really.
Let's
walk up to College Town. Yeah.
It's just too cold for hot truck business.
So let's see. And you had some news. Also, there's some news out in Candor. Some interesting.
We did another one of those political maneuvers that took a lot. This one did take a lot of people by surprise. Candor Town Supervisor Bob Riggs was away visiting relatives in Louisiana, and Councilman Matt Crow made an aggressive move to take over the village of Spencer.
Coup d'état.
Yeah, pretty much a coup. Even though they're not contiguous, Spencer Town, of course, is next to Candor, and there some years ago there was an effort to have them consolidate or merge their school systems. That fell flat. There's a little friction between the town of Spencer and the town of Candor.
Are they old like polo rivals or something?
Oh, actually, they have a jug game.
Ah.
Right. So they are rivals for the jug. They have that football game every year. But I think it goes a little deeper than that. So at any rate, this was sort of skipping over the town of Spencer into the village of Spencer because Candor does not have a stoplight. Okay. And they need one. A lot of towns feel that is the mark of legitimacy. According to Mr. Crow, they don't care if it's the blinky kind or if it has all three colors. I believe the one in Spencer is the blinky kind. In the village of Spencer, right, and right on the
I think
corner,
you can reprogram
corner by the right.
But even add some filters, so if they wanted to have a sort of like psychedelic spot, like stoplight experience, you could probably set it up on like a strobe sort of deal for street festivals and such.
Right. Well, if you want to be on the map.
Yeah.
You need at least claim, in Wikipedia, in your entry, that you have a stoplight.
Well, most economic growth planners these days are just recommending that you start an electronic dance music festival in your town if you want to be really anyone.
We could suggest that.
I think
we totally could because, I think that would fly. Carrie and I were just at the Candor Chamber of Commerce Expo and in the fire hall, and I think that
Did they have a DJ?
No, they needed one.
More dubstep at the Chamber
or
of Commerce.
Dubstep. Yep. Yeah, I think we could get Nancy King in on that. She's a pretty lively lady, and that could be a lot of fun. So stay tuned to see what happens next year at the Candor Chamber Expo. And moving on. What else did we have?
I have the list.
Yeah, you have the list.
Oh, you're
That's
writing
Wednesday
about,
afternoon.
You're writing about Spoon River.
Spoon River.
Yeah.
Okay. This was an interesting story to do. Dennis Dorr of Trumansburg is doing Spoon River anthology. He's been working on it with the community players. Boy, for a couple months. So these are folks from the community that are putting on a specific version of Spoon River Anthology. What it is takes place in the Spoon River graveyard, and it's as if the dead could speak. Everybody sort of tells how they died, or they talk about their life. a little bit. And so this was written initially by Edgar Lee Masters, and he wrote it almost as a novel where it was one poem after another. And some of them were quite long. And this came out 100 years ago. It'll be exactly 100 years ago on opening night, which I believe is the 9th, April 9th, right? And then an actor, Charles Aidman, brought it to the stage, I think in the 60s. And he took...
Oh, really? It took that long?
It might have been the 30s. I'm a little fuzzy on when that happened. I mean, anyway, I think he's still alive. But at any rate, by taking out some of the monologues and arranging them into a
it's a fairly thick.
I've
never read the whole original book, but bits and pieces. But for considering it's versified,
yeah.
Considering that, it's a pretty decently thick paperback. So yeah, doing it on stage, I would imagine, would take
it would
quite
take
a while.
It would take
to
a
go
long
through
time.
Because it's kind of like Winesburg, Ohio, in that sense, same era too, where you have this sort of, the whole town.
The whole town is talking,
getting in everyone's business from.
And it's, I mean, the language is beautiful. It's very poetic, and it was interesting to me because I read something once about cemeteries and how they, oddly enough, are sort of a symbol of democracy. I mean, it's not like. Not to say that democracy is moribund, but that in the old days we had monuments to kings. I mean, the only people who really had a permanent marker of their death were, pharaohs or people who were kind of a big deal, who were buried in Westminster Cathedral or something like that. So, so in the graveyard, everyone gets to speak, and these are people who were not of any note, that everyone ignored, or one guy that's in the graveyard, there was a train crash and he was mistaken for someone else, and so he's wondering, why am I buried here? I'm not even from here. So it's fun, but it's got a lot of depth. And
does the production keep the original? I mean, what verses they do use, or what characters they do use? Do they keep the original?
Yeah, they keep the original monologue, the original verse. But Dennis has chosen which ones to use. And this one, he's working on giving it a feminist slant. He talked to a young woman, Margaret Lundberg, who did her undergraduate thesis on feminism in this work. And so, so the women's voices are very important. So. So it'll be an interesting production. And then our final Trumansburg story, another regime change in Trumansburg.
All sorts of topplings and changes this week.
A bizarre, but Marty Petrovic, who is professor of turf science at Cornell, has been invited to become the turf czar of Dubai. Regretfully, he said he was going to leave his beloved Trumansburg, set down his crown of, mayoral authority. A hapless blacksmith was walking through the village offices when this happened. Duran Van Doren. He was just there to use the copier. He was roped in and anointed.
Never use the copier at a public place.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tammy does have a problem with people just marching in and using the copier at random. So, but Duran, he recovered quickly. He thinks on his feet. He promised a pot for every chicken, which he can do since he's got the forge. And
how many chickens are there in T-Burg?
12.
There's 12 chickens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but he's got he's working on other projects.
Okay.
So, so at any rate, and a jubilee. There will be a jubilee, which I think Trumansburg and all the celebrations that it's had, no jubilee yet. So I'm looking forward to that. And that, I think, is the week in review, the week coming up. Thanks for joining us on Around the Lake, and we'll see you again on April 8th.